Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Aubrey Reeves, CEO of Business and Arts. Before we begin, I'd first like to take a moment to acknowledge that I am a settler speaking to you from Takaranto. I have the honor to be a guest on the traditional lands and waters of the Petun and Wendat people, the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee Confederacies, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River, as well as many other Indigenous nations, some of whose names are no longer remembered. All year long, but especially as we mark National Day of Truth and Reconciliation in a few days' time, we acknowledge all who came before us and have traveled the lands and waters of this territory. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work, to live, and to meet on these lands. Today's session will include the latest insights from the Arts Response Tracking Survey, also known as ARTS. This project is a partnership between Business and Arts, the National Arts Centre, and Nanos Research, which began in May 2020. Through quarterly surveys of over 1,000 Canadian culture goers, our aim has been to provide the arts sector with data and analysis to inform your decision-making so that the sector can be more adaptable and responsive to the ever-changing landscape. A big thank you to the Speaker Series presenting partner, Power Corporation of Canada. And I'd also like to thank supporters Irfan Raji and Camdo for their support of arts. The full arts report is now available in both English and French on our website. This edition of the survey was in the field in July. We're happy to have ASL interpretation for today's session. Auto-generated English and French captions can also be turned on in the control panel. Only the presenters and moderators will have our microphones and cameras on today, so please submit your questions in the Q&A box. The session is scheduled for 1 hour and 15 minutes to give us ample time for questions. So now we will start today's session with a presentation of the research findings by Nik Nanos. As the Chief Data Scientist at Nanos Research, Nik has led thousands of research projects in Canada and around the world, ranging from market studies, customer satisfaction tracking, creative testing, program development, and reputation management. Nik has worked alongside many arts and cultural organizations, including the Ontario Arts Council, BC Arts, and a variety of museum and art gallery institutions. So welcome, Nik, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Aubrey. Great to see everyone virtually and to join them. I'm going to do a quick walk through the latest findings of the Arts Response Tracking Survey. And like all the other occasions where I've joined folks and shared the tracking, I will be, after I do my presentation, I will be in the chat. So please post any questions in the chat box, please. And then I'd be happy to answer them. Also, if you have any ideas for any future research or questions that you'd like to see Business in the Arts and the NAC together do, please do that. So I'm going to start off by sharing my screen. So you will have to indulge me for 1 second. Here we go. And okay, so we will start with a walkthrough. There are 4 broad topics that we decided to unpack in this wave of the tracking. We, as we usually do, focused on attendance so that we can get an idea of what we might be able to expect in the next while. Then we also unpacked benefits and barriers, what might happen or what could be done to improve the appeal of on the arts and culture front in terms of attendance. And also we wanted to unpack the whole concept of diversity and sense of belonging in this particular wave of research. Now, on the attendance or expected attendance, and this is a particular question where we asked individuals whether they would be spending more, the less, or about the same amount of time attending arts and cultural performances. And we have to remember this is only of arts and culture goers only. You can see across the top that a pretty strong majority of individuals, 64%, or almost 2 out of every 3, expected to spend about the same amount of time attending arts and cultural performance. But what I look at many times is the trade-off between those that say less and more. So what the research suggests is that there's been a bit of negative pressure in terms of overall attendance. But when you look at the numbers below, that negative pressure on attendance in arts and cultural performances there's no significant difference or no difference between on a gender front at least, but you can see at least that individuals over 35 years of age are we're probably more likely to see a little bit of negative pressure on that front compared to individuals who are under 35 years of age, where you have about just as many saying they would be spending more time compared to less time. The other thing is that there's a bit of when we kind of look beneath the numbers in terms of the impacts across different types of arts and culture activities, namely museums, galleries, outdoor events, and indoor events. What you can see here, at least, is that there's been a little bit of an upward tick in frequency for indoor events in terms of those that are reporting they'll be attending every 2 to 3 months. For outdoor events, you can see that a little bit of frequency on that front, but you can also see that for museums and galleries, the proportion of individuals that reported they would visit a museum or gallery once every 6 months or less has actually increased. So not only do we see a little bit of a demographic in terms of age differences on some of these behaviors, also some differences based on the type, or what do we call it, the format of the arts and culture experience, whether it's an indoor arts and culture experience, an outdoor arts and cultural experience, or a museum or gallery. Asked about preferences when attending arts and culture events, we asked individuals to rank different types, and you can see all the different types of experiences that we asked them to rank. You can see at least that for those arts and culture goers that were over 55 years of age, were more likely to identify large performance venues as being preferred, and about just as many of those older individuals said local theaters. Not a big surprise. You can see that for younger individuals under 35 years of age, they were more likely to identify outdoor spaces and stadiums and arenas as preferred venues compared to individuals in the other age cohorts. And not much difference or variation, maybe a little bit among galleries and museums, but generally consistent on that front. When asked what they get out of the experience of attending arts and culture events, and you can see on the right-hand side the overall responses, and you can see a pretty interesting mix of things ranging from socializing to learning, escaping from everyday life, relaxing, indulging themselves, having a date night. Those were the overall numbers, but when you drill down by generation or age, you can see that there's a fairly noticeable difference, at least, where you can see if you happen to be over 35 years of age, or even 55 or over, you are more likely to identify learning as one of the top motivators, while if you were under 35 years of age, you are much more likely to identify either looking for a de-stressing activity in order to relax, or having a date night. And I don't know if those two things are mutually exclusive or together, but that's how people answered it in terms of what they selected. But I think the key takeaway here is that when we look at top motivators, there are some noticeable differences based on how old one is. Barriers to attendance. You can see overall nationally, about 12% of all culture goers basically said there were no barriers, or none of the barriers above kind of match them. But you can see that distance more likely to be a barrier for older arts and culture goers compared to younger culture goers. But you can also see among that younger cohort under 35 years of age, those individuals more likely to identify than individuals in other age categories, not knowing if they will enjoy it, probably wanting a little more of a sure thing, or even mentioning childcare as as a potential barrier, much more likely to identify childcare compared to those that are over 35 years of age. Now, this is a new question that we tested on, and we basically asked about how Canadians felt in terms of arts and cultural institutions and the job that they did at creating experiences that are welcoming to a diversity of Canadians. Factoring the margin of error, you can see in some regions it's close or near a tie. For example, in Atlantic Canada, factoring the size of the subsample, Ontario and the prairies, close to or near a tie, factoring the margin of error for those regional subsamples. You can see that individuals that lived in British Columbia were more likely to give a thumbs up, and also individuals that lived in the province of Quebec were more likely to give a thumbs up in terms of the job that arts and culture institutions do at creating experiences that are welcoming to a diversity of Canadians. And this is my last slide before I throw it back to you, Aubrey. The other thing that we tested on was asking Canadians whether they thought that arts and culture events, what type of impact that they might have in terms of a sense of belonging. And you can see that pretty strong sense. About 1 out of 20 Canadians, so there's a very small number, believe that arts and culture events have a negative or somewhat negative impact. But the reality is Canadians by a very significant margin are most likely to say that arts and culture events have a positive or somewhat positive impact on the sense of belonging. And so, the good news is, I think overall, as you can see, and I'm just going to get ready to throw it back to you, Aubrey, is that Canadians recognize that arts and culture events and experiences have a positive contribution to the sense of belonging. They generally think that we are more likely to think that we do a good rather than a bad job at creating those experiences that advance that sense of belonging. And we're basically in an environment where people can see the positive impact that arts and culture events and experiences have when it comes to a diversity of Canadians. And maybe with that, I will go back to the chat box. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have, and I'll throw it over to you, Aubrey.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, yes. So if you have methodology questions or data questions for Nick, put them in the chat box throughout our discussion. Meanwhile, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First up, Fernanda Sierra Suarez is an artist, an arts worker and creative facilitator from Guadalajara, Mexico, now based in Toronto. Her work is deeply rooted in community engagement, and she's led many initiatives in community arts, youth mentorship, and public history that foster connections and self-expression. As the Community Engagement and Programs Manager at Culture Days National, she develops resources for thousands of event organizers across Canada, from rural towns to urban centers, and contributes to public engagement campaigns that highlight the role of arts, culture, and creativity in building healthy, vibrant communities. She's also the co-founder of Creato, a grassroots organization that supports and amplifies Latin American artists and creatives in Canada, where she has led professional development and skill building opportunities for emerging and early career artists. Now we also have Emma Hassensal Hurley. Emma is a Wolastoqey artist from Nicoyquot, Tobic First Nations in New Brunswick. She specializes in beadwork, murals, and digital illustration, which reflect her identity as an ethnic woman and a Wolastoqey citizen of the Wabanaki Confederacy. In addition to her work as an artist, Emma is the curator of Indigenous Arts at the Beaverbrook Art Gallery in Fredericton. And she also teaches Indigenous art history in the Wabanaki Visual Arts program at the New Brunswick College of Craft and Design. Emma holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Mount Allison University and a Master's of Art in Art History from Concordia University. And third up, we have Ashley Daniel Foote, who is Vancouver Opera's Director of Engagement and Civic Practice. At Vancouver Opera, Ashley carefully develops all programming that takes place off the main stage and looks for unique and unexpected ways to highlight the power of opera in the community. He also manages all education, community partnerships, and guides the company's commitment to justice, equity, reconciliation, and diversity. He's particularly proud of his recent collaborations with the Vancouver Public Library, the Vancouver Art Gallery, and Rumble Theatre. And he is also co-chair of the City of Vancouver's Arts and Cultural Advisory Committee and a board member of the BC Alliance for the Arts and Culture. So welcome to the three of you. Okay, so let's get started. Fernanda, starting with you. You and I actually overlapped working together at Culture Days for a couple months. And Culture Days is Canada's largest public engagement campaign, and it's now on right now from coast to coast to coast with thousands of free and hands-on activities. One of the objectives of Culture Days is to highlight the role of arts and culture in our society. You're right in the thick of it right at the moment, but if you could take a step back for a moment and unpack the objectives and principles of the annual celebration for everybody.
Yes, of course. It's really wonderful to reconnect, Aubrey, through here. And I'm really thrilled to join this conversation alongside Ashley and Emma. So thank you for the kind invitation and a warm welcome to everyone joining today. Yes, as Aubrey mentioned, the annual Culture Day celebration is well underway. We launched last week on September 20th across the country, and it is running until October 13th. This year, it's our 15th anniversary, and we're supporting over 3,000 free or pay what you may events. And these are presented in over 30 different languages across more than 300 communities. At its core, Culture Days is a public participation campaign, and it is aimed at inspiring that support for our arts, culture, and heritage sectors, and also celebrate the creative expression within our own local communities. So one of those key objectives of Culture Days is to inspire engagement from everyone, whether you're a devoted culture goer, a first-time participant. The aim by removing these barriers is to participate in arts and culture activities. And under this public engagement campaign that encourages all to recognize that support and how it is vital, the vital role that it is arts and culture in belonging and in community connection in different aspects in our communities. Last year, we actually welcomed a record 4.4 million people across Canada that took part of their local Culture Day celebrations. And it has continued to grow year by year, especially so since the onset of the pandemic. And similarly to the research findings that Nik just presented, our annual surveys indicate that arts and culture attendees develop this greater appreciation for arts and culture, and also a likelihood to incorporate arts and culture in their social lives. We've also seen reports of an increased sense of pride and an increased sense of care for your community. And not only this, but they're also more likely to be engaged year-round. So yeah, I think this celebration represents that coordinated national public engagement campaign that can be Culture Days, that it's aimed at increasing access, participation, appreciation of arts and culture sectors. And yeah, we really do continue to be inspired each year by the incredible work that this self-organizing network brings to life each year.
Thank you, Fernanda. So over to you, Ashley. I don't think I've ever heard of a director of civic practice at an arts organization. What does that title really mean to you, and why is it important that we think about civic practices as arts organizations?
Thanks, Aubrey, for the question, and it's so nice to be here. Civic practice for me is really about understanding our place in the community and the fabric of what the community means. It's about creating a real meaningful engagement with our audience in our city by having real conversations about the art that we're creating. Even though the art that we're sometimes representing is hundreds of years old, we believe that there are so many ways that the human voice can still bring connection. And so whether that's engaging with political leaders across provincial and federal lines, or whether that's in communication with the host nations here in Vancouver with our Indigenous Advisory Circle, we're always trying to see if our programming can reflect the diverse voices and communities that are in Vancouver. And to do that, we've launched initiatives that try to spark joy in our audiences, whether that's through creating free events like opera date night or further developing our educational programs that allow students from all across the Lower Mainland to connect with a grand opera, but also see the humanity and the artists that are involved, and then hopefully envision themselves as part of it. And so that's incredibly rewarding for us when we think about how young people can be part of a civic practice. It's also about further empowering them in their own lives by, you know, showcasing their passions and listening to their voices as we confront things like the climate crisis and other issues. It's also expanding our impact into the wellness space, thinking about how the human voice and breathing can reflect on health and wellness, looking at some of the research that Renee Fleming has recently talked about in her book. Basically, what civic practice for us at Vancouver Opera does is it ensures that we're not just a performance on a stage. It's also about an active, inclusive place that reflects the needs, aspirations, and well-being of our whole community. It's why this work is so important to me, and it's about making the arts a living, breathing part of civic life.
That's pretty powerful. Thank you. Emma, what does it mean to you as an artist and a curator to bring artists into collaboration with a particular community, especially when considering Indigenous communities? And if you could expand a bit on what the Beaverbrook Gallery is doing to forge those relationships and amplify Indigenous voices within the institution.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me. Very happy to be here. So I often work with Indigenous artists who haven't had the chance to showcase their work in larger institutions. And while I haven't been able to exhibit every local Indigenous artist, I'm always looking for ways to collaborate with those that I have yet to connect with professionally. And so for me, bringing Indigenous artists into these spaces is about creating relationships that elevate their voices in a meaningful way. And a recent project of mine called Wabanaki Modern is one example where my co-curator and I heavily involve community members throughout the research and curatorial process from start to finish. And so building, nurturing, and maintaining these relationships really is key because this work is a long-term commitment to community. Since I started in 2018, I've curated 9 exhibitions at the Beaverbrook that highlight Indigenous artists, and audiences are very eager for this knowledge and these art forms, considering the political climate that we're in. And so my role as a curator is to care deeply for Indigenous art and artists, and I take that responsibility very seriously. The Beaverbrook has built strong connections to Indigenous organizations, businesses, classrooms, and local communities, including the 3 neighboring Wolastoqey communities near Fredericton. And over the past 6 years, we've hosted countless programming events, like from artist talks to workshops, fashion shows, book launches, all focusing on Indigenous art and artists. And so as both an artist and a curator, I see my role as contributing to community by ensuring that Indigenous narratives are respected and thoughtfully presented. This shapes not only the institution, but enriches a broader cultural conversation. And it's about being that good community member in this space of storytelling and gathering and helping to create opportunity for artists.
I love how your engagement process doesn't come at the end of curating a show, but really is right from day one. One of the barriers that we saw in Nik's data to attending arts and culture events is simply the distance required to travel, with 35% saying that the location is the biggest factor that's preventing them from attending something. And actually, one of the things you focus on is bringing the power of opera to community spaces. Can you tell us about an example of how you tried to break down the challenge of that location barrier with potential audiences?
Absolutely. You know, one of the ways we've looked at that location barrier is to bring our Voices program, which is a program that we created last year through support from the TD Ready commitment. And that was allowing us to bring performances directly into small communities, whether that was at Deer Lake Park in Burnaby or in Steveston Village or in places like Surrey and New West. We were able to bring actual free opera performances to civic theaters, to outdoor spaces, and bring them to life. Beyond that, we've also decided to go into places like public libraries, and our partnership with the Vancouver Public Library Opera Adventures has been undeniably successful. We've done, I think, 9 events now we always have about 300 attendees who are coming out and discovering, in some cases, opera for the first time, and discovering that it's not this stuffy elitist art form, but really it's vibrating with life. And so when we have a chance to dialogue and engage with folks to break that location barrier, it's really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Libraries are a really wonderful partner when it comes to public engagement. Certainly, they're a key player in the Culture Days network across the country. Fernanda, I don't know if you want to follow up on that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is very interesting to hear actually about the success with that type of community event. Yeah, at Culture Days, we've seen municipalities really grow the program, partnering with local libraries, local arts councils, and also, you know, Art Center for Performing Arts organizations adapting maybe some of their programming and really providing that community invitation, even giving a behind the scenes look at your space, at what you do, inviting local artists to be part of that programs. It's also something very exciting to see that yeah, we see across rural communities, cities, and urban centers. Yeah.
Yeah, especially in rural communities, the library really becomes that cultural focal point as a venue, but also connecting and programming location. The majority of the survey respondents felt that attending arts and culture events had a positive or somewhat positive impact on their sense of belonging. We're living in a time of increased isolation and loneliness. Everyone is talking about that all the time these days. So it seems to me that this is one of the greatest contributions that arts and culture can make to help forge a healthier society. How can we really, as arts organizations, lean in to this role of forging a sense of belonging? And this is for all of you. I don't know who wants to jump in first on it. Takers, and I'll go. Emma, do you have thoughts first?
I think it is evident that the arts can enhance feelings of belonging, and certainly within the community that I belong to, because I think that shared experience connects us to one another, and that is a major motivator to being an artist and working with artists.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can always be better at creating inclusive spaces by designing programs that welcome diverse audiences. And I also believe that in my specific case, we can be better at recording how our programming impacts our audience to ensure that we are genuinely contributing to the arts community in Fredericton and beyond Fredericton. And so with that, perhaps arts organizations can also lean into advertising, I don't know if that's the right word, or highlighting reasons why coming into the gallery or a cultural institution is important and how it may positively affect them in the self-care era that we are in. And socializing and learning new things outlined in the findings are good for your mental health, as well as taking breaks from the busyness of life. Although as a cultural event goer, for example, I may need to understand why I want to be there, and why should I step away from my busy life to try to attend an event, aside from issues like childcare and illness or anything related to impact someone's participation. Like I like the examples that were given about like highlighting your cultural center as a date night spot. But now I'm getting into like marketing mode. And so there's a section also on financial barriers in the findings, and I know that not all arts organizations are able to offer this, but at the Beaverbrook, we offer free admission to students and local universities, the Craft College, like NBCCD. Thursday nights are by donation. Indigenous peoples have free access to the gallery, which falls in line with other institutions across Canada. And not every time, but almost the majority of times, artist talks are free to the public, and this eliminates that financial barrier to some extent.
Mhm. Yeah, Ashley.
I just want to jump in and really echo what Emma was saying and agree. We've noticed that when we offer like full-fledged free offerings, we're seeing audience members come in droves to these concerts. We're not just showing little segments of a performance, we're doing a full performance. And last year we did 12 free concerts around Vancouver, including in our Opera Center in East Vancouver. And one of my favorites was an evening with our associate conductor, Les Dalla. He also plays the piano, and did an evening of Philip Glass and Radiohead. And who would have thought that an opera company could program things like that for free? And a lot of the audience members were like, are you sure we don't need to pay for this? And no, we want to welcome you to these moments. We want to make you feel this is a space for you to express your passion and your interests. And we're going to keep leaning into that.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really wonderful to hear. We see it with Culture Days events as well, as that opportunity. I think you mentioned, Ashley, earlier, to like spark joy, invite people into that space, and really invite folks. In a way, I think Culture Days can be also that opportunity to cultivate that sense of belonging through offering those low barrier cultural programs. We've seen it not only be an opportunity to bring those audiences in, but also build new or closer partnerships between those local organizations, like I mentioned, municipalities, libraries, also unite cultural communities that can, later develop into those social connections, collaborations. I think it's very encouraging to hear from this research and how that recognition of the fundamental value of arts is being looked at. We've also seen in our surveys that these creative spaces that welcome that community participation have increased engagement among certain sectors of the population that arts and culture organizations are increasingly looking to attract. Like mentioned in the research, those audiences under 35 years of age. Last year, notably, 64% of participants at Culture Days identified under the age of 35. 40% as visible minorities, and 38% as newcomers or immigrants. So it's really great to see these programs being embraced and really spearheaded by centering that community participation and leaning into that.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned newcomers. Fernanda, you are a newcomer to Canada, and you co-founded an organization to support the career of other newcomer Latinx artists. When you think back to your early days in the country, what things did you feel were lacking that would have made it easier for you to establish yourself in the art scene, as well as to feel more welcomed as an audience member?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that when I first started to delve into the arts and culture sector here in Canada, I came across a lot of other immigrant, newcomer, or refugee fellow arts workers, artists, creators, that found it challenging to understand how to build a sustainable career and make a living from your artistic practice in this new environment. And that's one of the reasons even why Credo started and was founded. It was a way to offer that supportive network of artists and creators for this group, particularly with roots in Latin America and the Caribbean. And it became a space and a community where to connect and collaborate and support one another. And we're always reflecting and asking community members what it is that as emerging or early career artists they're seeking. And we often over and over again we hear this need for access to arts entrepreneurship, professional development opportunities, and also community building spaces, thinking also about audience members. This year, we got to host for the second time, with the support of Artreach and Toronto Arts Council, a mentorship program called Project Crea, which means to create in Spanish. And this really focused on building artists with tools to build their own creative practices in a holistic, healthy, sustainable way. So some of the things that we included in the program were, how to develop your own project, handle finances, grant writing, all those skills related to arts entrepreneurship. And we've seen this type of program really be influential for further like exciting opportunities for folks to join film festivals or just be more exposed to what the sector offers. So learn about residencies, all these things. And yeah, it's very interesting, but I see many spaces and communities like Credo popping up that are born out of this need that the arts community has to make spaces and these opportunities a bit more accessible and welcoming, particularly to to newcomers and immigrants.
Mhm. I just wanted to remind everyone in the audience that we will be taking questions from the audience. So if you have something that you'd like to ask our panelists, please type it in the Q&A box and we will be getting to those. So Emma, we're just a couple days away from the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. It's on Monday. As an Indigenous artist and curator, how would you like to see arts and cultural organizations and cultural workers across the country engage in efforts at reconciliation on that particular day, but also year round?
It's a big question.
It is a very big question.
And there is no umbrella recommendation for this. As each Indigenous community across Canada requires different structural and social support, organizations and institutions that work in relationship with Indigenous communities must be very open, must be very good at listening and supporting people and artists and staff. And so true reconciliation, and it's not my favorite word. I think I prefer reparation sometimes, in the arts, means supporting Indigenous sovereignty and self-determination. And that could look like compensating Indigenous knowledge holders fairly, committing to long-term partnerships within Indigenous communities, and hiring Indigenous staff in meaningful positions of influence. And so I think it is critical for arts and cultural organizations to move beyond symbolic gestures and engage in long-term commitments. And I'm sure this has been said many times that truth and reconciliation cannot be reduced to a one-day event. It has to be embedded in the institution's everyday practices. And this means more than just acknowledging Indigenous land or hosting events around September 30th. It's about building lasting relationships with the communities and ensuring that those voices guide the direction of programming and decision-making all year round.
Ashley, in your bio, I highlighted that you're also the lead on reconciliation at Vancouver Opera. Do you want to just reflect on what your organization is doing?
Sure, absolutely. Again, what we are determined to be is not just checking off a box. It's to have an ongoing conversation with the host nations and also to think about ways that we can integrate their voices into our ongoing programming. That is thinking about how we can reflect as an organization, both with internal learning, but also public-facing events. We recently concluded a celebration of Indigenous culture, Voices of the Solstice, a free concert in our rehearsal hall where we were honored to welcome some wonderful storytellers and singers with some also Western artists together. And, we were one of the first opera companies to have an in-person land acknowledgement, but beyond that, we've also had an ongoing discussion with a circle of Indigenous artists who will question and talk about the work that we're doing and continues to hold us accountable. It's an ongoing process. It's one that we know we have still lots of work to do, but it's one that we continue to be very much committed to.
Mm-hmm. So as we saw in the data, socializing and learning new things, when all the different demographics were added together, were tied as the primary benefits that respondents expected to get out of attending arts and culture. As Nik talked about, there were some differences once we drilled down into the demographics, but nonetheless, curators and artistic directors, they don't generally design their main season of arts programming with those two benefits as the primary focus. there's sometimes secondary considerations and often handled by a separate education department or an engagement department. So how can we center socializing and learning into the design of our programming to put those benefits right at the center of the experience? Anybody want to jump in on that idea? Fernanda.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's very interesting, but as I mentioned earlier, through Creato, we've seen how crucial community building spaces are, particularly for the support and development of these cultural communities. But I think with socializing and learning new things in mind, we have focused on offering workshops that highlight co-creative processes between artists and communities. So community arts programming, and also low stakes art making spaces that encourage that socializing. So a drop-in like craft session. We've had great success with like outdoor art picnics, collaborative nature projects. We actually started with online art making nights, and we found that these really foster the connections that within the group, but then also helps further building that network of support that we're always kind of striving to go towards. And yeah, these have taken different shapes like community arts or creating in nature events, but we've seen them as really popular spaces where folks get to create and then also foster that sense of inclusion and understanding while exploring like self-expression. Yeah.
Ashley.
One of the things we notice is that when we don't design for audience engagement right from the beginning, when thinking through our main stage season, we're losing so much. And one of the things that we've done in this season is take a look critically at the repertoire that we've programmed and then think about ways that we can deepen that experience, whether that's through ancillary programming or whether that's through a lot of online engagement that will talk about the work, that will allow artists to provide insight into their work, but also welcome the voices of the audience into that discussion through a Q&A sessions or pre-show chats that aren't just we'll talk and you'll listen, but let's talk about what you're actually experiencing. And so continuing to think about that as we program the big shows, which also have a lot of other considerations, is something that we're continuing to be committed to doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Emma, do you have anything to add there?
Well, in my position at the Beaverbrook, I work really closely with the education department, and luckily I work with somebody who supports my ideas and is always pushing for different ways that we can offer programming. I'm very interested in immersing the audience into the knowledge that is shared in the gallery. And what I mean is the way that educational spaces are typically set up makes this inclusion of other people very challenging, because in a classroom setting, you have the teacher at the front of the room and then all of the students kind of follow or are behind them. Mm-hmm. And at an artist talk or panel discussion, usually the room is set up in the same kind of dynamic. And in my opinion, it limits connection and conversation. And so after the presentation is finished, usually you go into question and answer period, but there's always this kind of barrier between the presenter and the audience. And so I'm trying to think through that dynamic a little bit as often as I can. And this is not a new concept or anything, but I like to set up a room in circles or semicircles. And recently I curated an exhibition where the artist presented her grandmother's kitchen table at the very center of the room. And it presented the perfect opportunity for programming. It was like begging for dialogue. And so the artist and I sat around the table with the audience all around us on 4 sides, and I facilitated roundtable discussion, but allowed the audience to insert their questions or interrupt me. And it changed the flow of the conversation. And it was a much more open and comfortable for everybody in the room. And we got great feedback from it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we had a question about this in the Q&A that Ashley, you typed a little bit of a response, but I'm going to return to it so we can all talk about it. Basically, good engagement strategies should have a positive outcome down the road, ranging from building new audiences to possibly cultivating future donors. But it is a long game, and sometimes people can be quite disappointed if they want to see immediate return on investment for their engagement events. So this person was asking, how do you measure success? So for example, if you have an engagement event with 100 people, you're not necessarily going to have an immediate translation to 10 new tickets sold. So how do you track effectiveness of your engagement strategies?
We like to look at the totality, not only of the number of people that come, but we'll look at the long tail on social media of the kinds of positivity that comes from that, the kind of repeat attendees that we might see coming back again and again to these events. And also there's a buzz that starts to build once you've done 12 or 13, and once people can count on the fact that you're going to be providing quality free entertainment or activities or engagement. And so when we see how quickly the free RSVPs fill up, then we know that we're on the right track. And we'll obviously engagement numbers, audience numbers are important too as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Emma, do you get involved in the tracking at all at Beaverbrook?
No, not too much. I
Mhm.
think from my experience, I'm looking for audience members who come back to programming and also different demographics that I'm not used to seeing in the gallery, like younger audience members, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Fernanda, Culture Days does a lot of tracking, so that's why I came to you last, so you can really expand on this.
Yes, of course. Yeah. On our end, we have seen that 80% of attendees say that they will return or make donations to that organization that they're participating in. So we've seen all different kinds of programming that gets adapted with that idea of perhaps bringing those attendees to the space and then the open invitation for them to return. Again, I'll go back to municipalities and libraries because I think it's such a great example of how this program works at that level, because they are trying to build those relationships with attendees. And if perhaps they just through an open rehearsal, we try to build those localized surveys with some communities so they get the specific data on why it is that attendees are going and going back and returning to those spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also think when it comes to Culture Days is that someone might try out something new for the first time at one organization one year and then something else another year. And so that they're building relationships with the whole idea of going to arts and cultural events, not necessarily with just one organization. So it's sort of an activity that lifts all boats as a sector. We have a couple questions about arts education. This person says, given the erosion of arts education across the country, is there recent research out there regarding partnerships with all levels of arts educational institutions, so school boards, post-secondary, community centers, etc.? And then more specifically, somebody else asked, what response do you get from students when you engage high schoolers, and how do you do that?
I got to try and answer that one.
Yeah, please do.
We have an exuberant response from high school students. I was so happy when we started our program back up after the pandemic called Opera Experience, and we had an open call to all high school students. We would pick 10 lucky students who would spend 5 or 6 rehearsals with us embedded in the opera, from rehearsal into the main stage to chatting with the artist to going down into the pit to standing at the podium. And the students were delighted. They spoke to us endlessly about how amazed they were by the process, but also the visioning for how they could see themselves in the art form. And for us, that's really what it's all about. And from there, they actually expressed interest in being part of our organization in ways that we didn't imagine. One of our students was the keynote speaker at our fundraising gala. Another is hosting a roundtable tomorrow night to talk about how she can use her voice towards tackling climate change. Another is going to most likely join one of our local arts service organization boards. So we believe that it's far more than just that they're going to join opera or bring their family to the opera. They're going to see how arts and culture can really enliven their futures. And they'll speak to us again and again.
Mhm. Yeah, that's amazing. Fernanda, it looks like.
Sure.
something.
Yeah, just to add to what you just said, Ashley, I think well, an example of what we saw a couple years ago, this high school in Toronto, Six Academy, they run a social entrepreneurship high school program that lets students really get that behind the scenes look and opportunity to work in the arts and culture sector, design, creative entrepreneurship. And it was a really great program that showed really how youth-led programs can take a variety of forms that keep youth engaged, sorry, and that keep them, you know, at the forefront of decision making as well. That's going to make them more engaged and excited to be part of it. If, you know, when they are asked about what it is that they're interested in, where they want projects to go. I've seen through Six Academy and Cradle that really does support and ignite that interest from students that perhaps it might be a bit more challenging otherwise.
Mhm. And Emma, your exhibitions, you had close encounters with high school students.
Yes, actually, over the 6 years that I've been at the Beaverbrook, I've done a lot of tours, and my position's really ingrained in education, mainly because I'm the only Indigenous person working at the Beaverbrook currently. But the high school tours kind of stick out in my mind, where I kind of have this feeling that they won't be as engaged as, say, the younger kids that come in, or even people in adult education, like from the universities. And it's kind of like a reverse effect where the older um, uh, guests that come in aren't as engaged as the high school students, aren't as excited, aren't asking questions. And it's been really nice to see. And if I can go back in my mind to when I was in high school, I wish that I would have had that kind of opportunity to immerse myself in an art gallery and receive education in that way, in that manner. Last year we were able to host artwork by high school students from around the province, and I wasn't involved in that project, but I think even giving students that opportunity to show their work in the institution was very meaningful.
Great. We've had a couple of questions in the chat and Q&A box about the demographic breakdown of the respondents in the survey. And I would just encourage everyone to download the reports from our website, because there is in the appendix very detailed tables that break down all this data by demographic. So if you're really interested in that, take a look. We have a couple minutes for a few more questions. So please submit them in the Q&A box. One from the Q&A box is for you, Fernanda, for Culture Days. Does Culture Days have data on payments to artists associated with Culture Days activities? With research showing that so many professional artists are making less income these days, their sense of belonging is impacted when they aren't compensated, especially in smaller and diverse communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. We do collect as much info as we can from organizers, and the majority do report saying that they are paying artist fees that are in line with, you know, CARFAC fees, professional rates. And as part of this engagement process with organizers, we communicate that expectations that artists are paid fairly. It is challenging to enforce it at that scale, but that's the encouragement and expectation. And we have seen through this data again and again that that encouragement for events to be supported. And that's why on our end as well, you know, for those bigger institutions, adapting programming has been successful. And then for the smaller communities, those partnerships with local culture day celebration, that some of them do provide funding for artists now and have their own local programs is possible. But for sure, the expectation is never for artists to do work for free, because we know they should get paid.
Thank you, Fernandez. This person flags that this might be more of a question for Nick, but I think I can maybe turn it a little bit towards our panelists. They say someone working in arts not-for-profits for young people. They're wondering about research being done about how parents are making their decisions about what arts programs they bring their kids to, or barriers that they're experiencing as parents registering their kids or taking their kids to things. So instead of high school, let's think about those very, very young audience members and those first experiences that are mediated by parents, and how you connect with those sort of those family audiences. Yes. Any thoughts about connecting with parents to be able to capture the very young audiences? Okay, nobody has any thoughts about that one. We'll move on. How has dovetailing or collaborating with development and marketing worked in terms of these kind of engagement activities and programs? So, where in the process do you work with the marketing department? What's working, what's not?
Yep, I'll jump in.
Ashley.
It's essential. It's essential right from the beginning. I'm a big believer in that we don't exist in vacuums in our arts organizations. I sit on the senior leadership team, and I will aim out all of our engagement from soup to nuts with every department. Because if I don't have buy-in from development, who's going to procure funding for these programs ostensibly, and if marketing doesn't understand the messaging that's needed or will work with me to come up with that, we're not going to have success across the whole way. So it's really important for us to kind of have buy-in together. So we'll work collaboratively from the beginning to the end to ensure that our messaging makes sense, that our goals are appropriate. And so that's actually been the secret sauce for these programs. For our free concerts, it was started by our development. They got the funding from TD. They came to us in my department, and we talked it through. And then marketing came, and we worked together to develop key messaging and graphic design for all of it, which I think is also really important to building an audience, is building a consistent visual brand to all of this.
People have to see themselves first in the advertising before they can actually imagine themselves attending.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. To finish up, is there one key takeaway or piece of advice you'd like to leave with the arts and culture organizations represented in our audience today, looking to strengthen their audience engagement and community impact? So what would you advise everyone to do in terms of engagement? Emma, maybe let's start with you.
Keeping in line to some of the things that I've shared is being open and adaptable to the needs of your community is going to positively affect your organization or institution in the long run. And making sure that your relationships are created, and not only created, but nurtured in significant and safe and meaningful ways.
Yeah, Fernanda?
Yeah, I mean, along the same lines, that was beautifully said, Emma. I think addressing the needs of the community, listening, like you said, taking the time to build those relationships is very important as well. And I've seen it also be a great way to bring those local collaborators also excited to keep participating and keep building arts and culture programs that can really invite the community at large.
Yeah, final thoughts, Ashley?
I think the moment that you can start to envision your audience at the center of your programming is when exciting things can happen. If you're merely going to be talking about how lauded and amazing your guest artists are going to be, I think right there, maybe you're losing an opportunity to connect with your audience. And so when we think about what would delight and excite an engaged audience who maybe doesn't usually come to the opera, I think you're beginning a really exciting discussion about what engagement can look like. And when you do that, you're moving the focus away from just one sole arts organization, but like you said earlier, Aubrey, we're raising all boats. We're showing the ways that culture can have incredible value on the impact of our society.
Great. Well, I'm going to wrap it up there. A really big Thank you to all of our panelists, to Ashley Daniel Foote, Emma Hashensal-Perley, and Fernanda Sierra Suarez for contributing your insight and thoughtful ideas about this research and about public engagement. Thank you for answering any questions from the audience. Thank you to Nik Nanos for all your analysis of the data. It's been a pleasure. Thank you to the National Arts Centre and Nanos Research for continuing to partner with us on the Arts Response Tracking Survey. Also a thank you to Camdo and Irfa and Rashi, who are both continuing their support. And finally, a big thank you to the Power Corporation of Canada, who is presenting a partner of the Business and Arts Speaker Series. If you want to learn more about any of the Business and Arts programs and events, please head to our website for more information or visit us on social media. Many thanks, everyone, and have a great day.